PhocusWire Editor-in-Chief Mitra Sorrells, and today I am joined by Kathy Morgan. She is Vice President of Product Management at Sabre. Welcome, Kathy.
Hey, Mitra, thank you for having me.
So you have spent your entire career at Sabre, more than 3 decades. Certainly the travel industry and airline distribution dynamics specifically have really evolved over that time, particularly in recent years. How would you describe the value of the GDS today?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And yes, I know it's shocking to think I have been anywhere for 30 plus years, but this has certainly been a great place to be. Lots of very exciting, dynamic industry. As I think about kind of where we are now relative to maybe when I first came into the Sabre organization, in fact, I believe that the value of the GDS actually is stronger than ever. And I think that that may be counterintuitive to the way some people think if you follow some of the top line narratives in the industry. But why do I think that? What you're seeing right now, much of the distribution dynamics that are in play, things like NDC, are actually driving more and more complexity into an already complex ecosystem. This is really kind of the core of, think about it as content fragmentation. Sourcing content is becoming more complicated because there are more and more sources. And if you think about what is the GDS good at, we are born aggregators. Our role in the ecosystem is taking fragmented content, aggregating it, integrating it, normalizing it, and enabling it to then be able to go into this broader travel marketplace. And so I think, Sabre, that is the core of what we do. We are a master at managing complexity. And I think as this notion of NDC has become, obviously a much bigger focus, that the value of that aggregation and normalization is just so critical to the success of the overall ecosystem and NDC, certainly.
Okay, so as we start to talk about this in a bit more detail, certainly there are so many acronyms and so much terminology that is used when we start to talk about the future of travel tech. As we've discussed, obviously NDC, we hear about one order, offers and orders, modern retailing. Help us make sense of all of that.
Yeah, it's a little bit like alphabet soup, right? And so you have to always be trying to figure out what exactly does that mean. But I think about it maybe in the terms of building blocks of how all these components fit together to, I'm going to jump to the last point you asked about, which is modern retailing. Okay. If you to understand that all of this disruption that is going on in the marketplace around these distribution dynamics, the core of it is how do we get to an environment that enables modern retailing? So I would really start with NDC. I think that's the kind of the basic foundational building block. NDC, what is that? NDC is an industry initiative that is moving how airlines distribute their products from an EDIFACT-based technology to an XML-based technology. So think about what's different about that is it's enabling real-time communication between third-party channels and the airline system. In traditional EDIFACT world, where the GDS was the enabler of this, airlines didn't have visibility to those demand signals because the GDS managed the shopping, managed the booking. The first reference point that an airline would have in a traditional implementation was the booking. So if you think about it, I'm an airline and I want to think about what products do I want to promote? How do I want them to be promoted? They're missing that opportunity because they don't have those demand signals. That's really the fundamental opportunity of what NDC is enabling, is bringing visibility at the very beginning to when that shop is occurring that allows airlines to be able to influence potentially the outcomes and hopefully the conversion of those opportunities. So think about NDC as the building block that really is that enabler of being able to retail via offers. So then as I go from NDC, I think the next thing is to understand offers and orders, because that's kind of on top of NDC. So as you think about offers and orders, that is a retailing framework that applies to most retailing industries. The one that I use, it's very much overused, but everyone gets it, is if you think about your user experience on Amazon. When you say, I want a pair of tennis shoes, and you go to Amazon and you put that in your app, you get all these offers that are saying, we have all these different tennis shoes, and here are the details, and here are the prices. Here's how users feel, of all this content that helps you make a purchase decision. But the minute you hit buy me or buy now, you've now transitioned to an order framework. So within that order, it contains all the detail of the product. Think about it as a SKU or a bill of materials. And from that point forward, that order is your reference point for where you go next. So if you want to change, add more products, you're going from this order moving forward versus back to this constant state of kind of shopping offer management. So it really allows you to start thinking about the types of products that you can include in your offers. In your orders. Another important aspect of orders is the evolution of the underlying technology. Moving to an open systems order management system allows you to think about content very differently because it starts decoupling from some of the limitations of the legacy P&R, if you're familiar with that term. So airlines can start thinking about, how do I bring third-party products into my orders or into my offers and into my orders? How do I bundle new types of products? So it really gives so much more flexibility into the definition of product, which I think is really important. So if you take those elements, NDC is that enablement of retailing via offers. Offers and orders are the underlying components that allow the mechanisms or technology that allows us to occur. All of those come together to enable modern retailing. So the end vision of the travel industry is allowing airlines and other travel suppliers to be able to sell their products the way they want to sell them, and to be able to expand the definition of their products, to be able to tailor and personalize, offer real-time visibility and dynamic offers. All of that comes together to create this notion of modern retailing.
I have to tell you, I've heard a lot of explanations about NDC and all of this, and that is by far one of the best I've ever heard. So I really appreciate your detailed explanation there and helping us understand how the parts and pieces all fit together. So you mentioned EDIFACT in that explanation. Certainly that's something we've been hearing a lot about in relation to American Airlines preparing to remove more than 40% of its fares from EDIFACT starting in April. It's generated quite a bit of commentary. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, I would say certainly from Sabre's position, I think it's a balancing act. If you look at where Sabre sits in the travel value chain, we have the opportunity to work with travel suppliers, travel buyers, other technology partners. And so when you sit in that intersection, there's a lot of different reactions to American Airlines announcements, right? And so as I look at it from American Airlines point of view, I think it makes a ton of sense. I think the timing is challenging. By timing, meaning from the time you make an announcement like that to the time frame in which it becomes effective. I think that's put a lot of pressure and anxiety into the ecosystem, because from December to April, technology just doesn't move that fast, and there's a lot of work that the various ecosystem players have to do. So I think that's probably the one thing, is I would say that just the amount of time to operationalize this is challenging. But put that aside, I think what they're doing makes a ton of sense. American Airlines has been a leader in NDC from its inception. They've invested a ton of money. They have very kind of big, bold ideas around product differentiation and how they want to market and sell their products. And they needed to see action in the ecosystem. So, the way you do that is you put a stake in the ground, right? And you invoke this action. So I do think that the step that they took certainly has been a catalyst for invoking this action that I mentioned across the ecosystem. So I think from that aspect, it's pretty energizing. It's definitely sending a signal of this commitment to the modern retailing, as we just talked about it a moment ago. But I also work a lot with travel agencies across, whether they're OTAs, TMCs, other brick and mortar. And for them, they're having real challenges with the timeline, and for good reason. I mean, as much as we say NDC has been around for 10 years, it hasn't really, right? These standards are still relatively new. Sabre's still building out our roadmap. Other ecosystem participants are still building out capabilities. And so I think the agencies are stuck in a place where they have technical dependencies on all these partners. They also have operational issues that they have to work through. Some aspects of NDC introduces new workflows. It removes some existing capabilities that agencies are really familiar with. And if you think about the agency environment, especially the TMC environment, they have spent years honing these processes to be ultra efficient on the backs of this on the existing technology. with those things changing, they're taking some pretty significant operational hits. And that is going to play out in, I think, a very challenging way, because this is already a very strained industry. We are just recovering from COVID. We all know about the labor shortages that all industries are dealing with. Certainly travel is not immune to that. So I think the compounding effect is probably what has people most nervous. But I can tell you what Sabre's doing in our role in all of this is we are very excited to be supporting the launch of AA's NDC content in April. We are ready to go. We're also working really closely with our agency partners to help alleviate as much of that anxiety as we can. We've been very solution oriented in the way we've integrated NDC. We've protected as much of the workflows as possible. We've integrated NDC into existing flows. So from a normalized content and workflow perspective. So I think it's just, it's an inflection point in the industry, and we'll get through it as an industry. We always do, but it definitely, I think we've got a bumpy ride ahead of us as we kind of work our way through all this.
So, and you just touched there on some of the meanings to some of the key constituencies and the partners and such that you work with. I'm wondering, what are some of the misconceptions about NDC that you hear most often?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, Mitra, is just around what is NDC. And you may have heard this, I've talked about this in some other discussions that I've had, is I think it's a real travesty that we allow this conflation of the term NDC to be used for so many things. Is it a technical construct? Is it a commercial construct? And that confusion has actually really slowed the pace down because we've spent so much time in the early days trying to get clarity of what it is and what it isn't. So I think that's probably the biggest misconception. At its core, NDC is a technical initiative, period. And so if you isolate that and then you say in any ecosystem, commercial evolution always happens, right? That is just a natural part of commerce. And allow that commercial evolution to occur without the coupling of it to NDC, I think would have been a much better way for us to have engaged in this as an industry. So that's probably the biggest misconception. I think another one that is a challenge is that there's this notion that NDC is a standard and that it's plug and play, and couldn't be further from the truth. We have multiple versions of the standard that different airlines have implemented. And within the implementations, every single airline implementation is different from one airline to the next, from one NDC API provider to the next, from one PSS provider to the next. So the level of complexity due to the lack of standardization on implementation is a huge challenge, and something that certainly Sabre has been working really hard on. But I do think that there was this notion that, oh, it's a standard, we can just plug it in and everything's going to work. And that's just not the reality.
So you touched there on the need for more clarity and removing the complexity and some of that. Anything else that comes to mind if I ask, what needs to be fixed in order for NDC to be successful at scale?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And that's probably one of the areas that I think has been unique from Sabre's approach from the beginning on NDC is we've always had that eye to scale, because we need this to not be a science experiment. It has to move into being a scaled product implementation that can drive commerce. And so I think about it kind of from two aspects. There are some fundamental gaps in the standards today that we still have to figure out as an industry how to fix. Probably the most notable one that you'll hear about is the lack of a schedule-led path. What does that mean? If I am an agency and this is true in corporate, but it's also true primarily in all other than like an OTA. I start with, I want to go from point A to point B on this day at this time. That's my entry point into a workflow. Then once I understand the date, the flights, and the availability of flights, then I say, okay, what is this going to cost? And you go from that level. NDC flips all of this on its head. It starts with an offer. Back to my point around, you put all the offers on the page with the prices. And so if an agent can't go, or travel consultant can't go straight into the flights, they have to start with these paired offers and prices. And that's putting a lot of challenges on the workflow because it's just time consuming. and that'll jump to the next thing of what needs to get fixed. The actual physical implementation of NDC, where the airlines are responsible for producing the offers, what that means is that in today's world, you have a very highly efficient scaled GDS shopping capability where we manage all that compute inside our four walls. We have to now go outside of our four walls and ask the airlines the questions. And we're seeing tremendous latency on that aspect of the shopping workflow. Again, north of 8, 9, 10 seconds sometimes. To give you perspective, in the GDS shopping environment, many of the responses are sub-seconds, maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds if you are dealing with a really complicated itinerary. So that's another thing that simply has to change. We have to get these systems engineered for scale, and we have to engineer out this latency, because if not, these offers are dead on arrival. Certainly in an OTA space, you're not going to wait for the response. Whoever comes back first wins. And in an agency, a non-OTA environment, a brick and mortar, they can't bear the operational cost of adding 8 seconds to every call. Think about how optimized their call handling times are and their overall operational metrics. It's just not bearable. So I think those are probably the two. I could probably go on and on, but those are probably the two biggest opportunities I see that we need to make sure we close the gaps on. And again, when I say we, it's an industry issue, not a Sabre issue.
Well, and that leads perfectly into what it will be my final question as we're wrapping up here. So clearly Sabre is doing a lot of work to get NDC capabilities into the ecosystem. Can you just touch on what are some of the areas that you have been able to solve for? And then what are the areas that you just can't solve on your own?
Sure. I'd say I'm going to go back to your very first question. What is the value of the GDS? The value of GDS is creating a marketplace that brings buyers and suppliers of travel together and doing it in a way that drives efficiency. That is how we've approached from NDC. So what are the things we've solved for? As a consumer of Sabre's NDC content, whether I'm an agency using Sabre points of sale like Sabre Red Workspace or our corporate booking tool Get There, or if I'm a consumer of Sabre's APIs, an OTA, a corporate booking tool, we have done all that normalization. So what we are exposing from an API perspective is a normalized interface. It doesn't matter what version of NDC that the airline's on. It doesn't matter what their PSS is. We have to care, but we manage that normalization within our applications so that user experience is as seamless as possible. I think that's probably one of the greatest contributions, and where the true value of what we do, we are able to do in this space, is being able to take out a lot of that technical complexity. We also, are doing a lot within our environments to address the latency issues. We've had a couple of airlines that have been really great partners on this, and we've been able to look at the technical implementation and come up with some ideas that have reduced the shopping time and gotten them back to within that 2 to 3 second range. So obviously, we're going to continue to work with our partners. We're also very fortunate, we have been spending the last few years of modernizing our overall ecosystem, our architecture. We are now, all of our NDC capabilities are on GCP, Google Cloud Platform. That gives us a ton of opportunity from a scalability perspective. So I think we're zeroing in on these key areas that really are going to drive value for how NDC will scale, and obviously roadmap execution, ensuring that we understand the indirect channel better than anyone. We know the capabilities that agencies need, making sure that we are building those around these NDC capabilities. Because I think I should have maybe added this in my previous, what's a misconception? The misconception is that shopping and booking is all that matters because that's what NDC covers. But in the agency environment, everything beyond that, how do you service it? How are you executing your duty of care responsibilities? How are you managing corporate travel policy compliance and travel management compliance? Those are all the downline things that we're doing that aren't necessarily NDC specific, but we have to make sure that NDC behaves in a way that powers all of those other downline processes. So that's what Sabre's doing. I think even when we get all of this perfectly right, and we are getting it very right every single day and continuing to progress, if the ecosystem doesn't move along, and that's a big word, what does that mean? All the players in the value chain, think about corporate booking tools, think about mid-office providers that still have routines running against PNRs that now need to run against orders. Think about back office systems that are expecting data to be coming from a certain source, that now that source of data could potentially be different. Each one of those elements in the value chain has work to do. And until all of us do our part, it's going to be a real constraint on the scalability of NDC.
Yeah, certainly a lot of complexity there. Something we will definitely be following, and so much to cover on this topic. I know that there's, as you said, much more that we could certainly be discussing down the road. So, yeah. Kathy Morgan from Sabre, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you today.
All right, bye-bye.